I'm Dr. Vanessa Sinclair, and this is Rendering Unconscious. My guest today is Dr. Joseph Scalia III, a psychoanalyst, environmentalist, and social critic. Dr. Scalia holds a doctorate in psychoanalysis, society, and culture from the Boston Graduate School of Psychoanalysis. He is in private practice in Livingston, Montana, living on the northern reaches of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Dr. Scalia is also a conservationist whose environmental criticisms have appeared recently in Counterpunch, Mountain Journal, Wilderness Podcast, Rendering Unconscious, and numerous newspapers in Montana. For more, please visit the website GallatinYellowstoneWilderness.org for information about the Gallatin-Yellowstone Wilderness Alliance. If you're listening to this podcast on the Rendering Unconscious stream, please know there is a video of our conversation on YouTube. Just search for TRAPART Films YouTube channel. That's TRAPART film at YouTube. Rendering Unconscious is also a book. Rendering Unconscious, Psychoanalytic Perspectives, Politics, and Poetry. From TRAPART Books, 2019. For more, please visit our publisher's website, trapart.net. That's TRAPART.net. You can support the podcast by visiting our Patreon, patreon.com/VANESSA23CARL. Your support is greatly appreciated. For more information, you can also visit my website, drvanessasinclair.net, or the podcast main website, renderingunconscious.org. Links to everything can be found in the text accompanying this episode.
Oh goodness, where to start? Well, actually that's easy because I want to start with what is the springboard for me for really the proposal of a new conservation ethic that I'm going to call Terra and Demos, but that I will get back to. And the springboard is the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, which has its center in Yellowstone National Park. And I'll describe what those things mean, at least what greater Yellowstone ecosystem means in a moment. But let me say this, I feel that interviews such as this are so important right now because even very socially conscious people around the world, very socially critical people around the world, even very environmentally conscious people around the world have no idea the dangers, by and large, almost exclusively, have no idea the dangers of to vast wild country that still exists here. And I think it's a national and an international issue that's been appropriated by locals and regionals here for their own self-interest, their own being tied to a dominant ideology of our society, which is consume, 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 and grow, 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 and everything will be fine. And that applies to, in America, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. So this area is very endangered, and people don't realize that. So this area, Yellowstone. So people know about Yellowstone Park, right? That is fairly known around the world, and people come from around the world in great numbers to visit Yellowstone Park, which is 2.2 million acres. What that amounts to in like miles, like square miles, Yellowstone is about, I'm going to say 45 miles by 45 miles. I've never looked on a map to see. Maybe it's more than that. Maybe it's 60 by 60, something like that. That's 2.2 million acres with all its incredible geothermal features that are very famous, phenomenal to experience, but also all of its iconic wildlife. So the wildlife here exists in its pre-1492 entirety. Everything of wildlife that was in the Yellowstone ecosystem before white people colonized this continent is still here. That is a rare claim to be made anywhere, anywhere on Earth. Certainly, it's the only place, I believe, that you can make that claim for an ecosystem in the lower 48. So what's here is apex predators: the grizzly bear, the gray wolf, buffalo, tremendous elk herds, beautiful, gigantic, numbering in thousands and numbers of those herds. Okay. It's not only beautiful, but it is sublime. And, we talk a lot about climate change, global warming. This is the big environmental threat that people are aware of. A little more, it's getting out there that it's not so single as that. We're looking at the threat of environmental collapse, which is many things. It's, it's ocean acidification. It's desertification of previous forest land or range grasslands. It's incredible pollution. It's all the plastics that we've put into the ocean. It's overfishing. It's over mining. It's dumping mine waste and all kinds of wastes all over the planet in a way, all of this in ways that just are not sustainable for the existence of humanity over the long run. So species losses, that's a very clear thing that Yellowstone stands as a sort of a symbolic and a material buttress against. So, okay, I'll say one more thing, and then I want to check in with you and kind of redirect or see where we're at. So that's Yellowstone, 2.2 million acres. The greater Yellowstone ecosystem is approximately 20 million acres. So that's from where I'm sitting right here, in fact, in Livingston, Montana. I'm on the northern edge of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, looking out my window right now at the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness. And it extends, so I'm on the roughly northwestern edge of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, and it extends, oh gosh, maybe 170 miles south, and then depending on where north to south you look across at its east to west breadth, it's Um, oh, it's anywhere from 100 miles to 50 miles. Okay. That the wildlife that I mentioned that exists in Yellowstone Park is dependent on that entire greater Yellowstone ecosystem. You can't just have that wildlife integrity in that little spot. If you, to most graphically easily imagine how that might be, if you brought the hordes of humanity that we're becoming in our ever expanding population to the edges of Yellowstone Park all around it, and there was no room for any wildlife outside of there, it's a little easier to imagine the threat that might bring to the wildlife. But imagine that actually is happening, with humanity encroaching into the tendrils that exist inside the greater Yellowstone ecosystem that aren't protected against development. So, okay, that's the kind of broad overview of what I think people need to be aware of. That Yellowstone, if we can preserve its biological, its wildlife diversity and that ecosystem integrity that is part of the wildlife diversity here is part of, if we can preserve that in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, being as large as it is, one, that is very hopeful, and so symbolically gives a sense of the possible future of humanity, and for what we can be, that we might actually be able to live in harmony with biodiversity and wildlife diversity and species diversity. But also it presents a very material reality that there's not a lot left of species diversity. And this is one of the places left. And the more we destroy those, the more we make those non-existent, or closer to non-existent, the closer we are to non-existent. Okay. So I've said a ton already to start. You can see a lot is on my mind.
No, it's a really good point. Funny thing that happened this morning when I was on Twitter, but this came up where apparently there's a group of like international scientists and also like sociologists and psychologists. I can't remember what the group they have formed is called, but I think it's working out of Brown University. And they said that they're trying to look at like the sociocultural issues that are keeping climate change and this climate crisis on the back burner, and like all the political issues and sociological issues that are keeping people from addressing this because it's an emergency, and for some reason it's not like all we're talking about.
Right. Yeah, that's very good. But see, even there, it's like it's climate and global warming, and it's so much more. Yeah. Even we look at the Green New Deal, that's all about climate change. It's all about getting fossil fuels reliance done with. But we don't know really how to live with our demands, humanity's demands for power, for electricity and gas. We don't know how to do that in a sustainable way for our human population. The Green New Deal, even if it succeeded, will not accomplish that. It's not even implementable in a sustainable way globally. It's presented as though it is, but the technology truly is not there. And there's a lot of science that indicates that, but science and engineering, but it's not that's just not in the public discourse at all. So even in this Brown University group, perhaps from what you've described at any rate, it's not on the front burner. And it needs to be. If we just are looking at climate change, we're going to miss the boat.
Yeah, I've been trying to watch in my pandemic depression. I've been trying to watch things about the planet and animals and nature and the interesting, great things that people do. And I watched this One Strange Rock recently, and they talk to all these astronauts that have been in space, and they talk about how, like, when you're in space, you can truly see that the planet is like one system, and that something happens on this side of the planet affects something on the other side of the planet, and people really need to start looking at it as one system and like something that's alive instead of treating it like something that's inert.
That is beautiful. I'm so glad you said that, and that's being said somewhere and is known. I think that's a crucial knowledge. So that takes me to this notion of, as I've termed it, an ethic of terra and demos, by which I mean we need, ideally, well, to survive, we need a collective ethic of the good of the all, the demos, all people, not some people, all people. So looking at the interconnectedness of us all, the interdependence of all of us on each other across the globe, but all of the earth also, terra, so terra and demos. And so that includes not just the air, it includes not just forest or wildlife, it includes rocks and how we mine and what we do with that. And so all of it is a system, as you said. That's wonderful. You'll have to send me a link, please.
I will.
To that. That's wonderful. I will look into that. And so, you know, we're a far cry from having a collective ethic of we're going to determine our policies and practices according to what is good and sustainable for all humans and all the earth. We are so far from that, of course. But what we could do is begin to implement that on small scales, like environmental groups, when they are making their strategy and vision and mission statements, could be making their determinations based on, if I promote this use of the land, what does that do for the long-term interdependence of the earth and of all aspects of the earth and of all humanity. And that is not going on amongst virtually all the big environmental groups. That is not part of their ethos, part of their ethic. It's not in their discourse. In fact, when something even approximating it is brought to their attention, they censor it as effectively as they can. So we'll see how much we get into that or not, but that is in the environmental movement.
Why do you think that is? Is it because they have their own kind of agendas that are more specific that they're pushing, or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they censor any kind of what I've started to call disputational dialogue, where nothing would be censored from the conversation, and we could really duke it out about everything that needs to be said, and that anyone can bring to the table to say, hey, this is crucial. How do you answer to this? That they don't want that, because what's happened as the environmental movement has evolved is it's evolved in concert with capitalism's evolution and capitalism's turn to neoliberalism, and to, as the political philosopher Wendy Brown puts it in her book, Undoing the Demos, which is what I borrow from my term terra and demos, is the economization of everything. The economization of everything has occurred. So everything that serves the neoliberal agenda, any aspect of life that could oppose the neoliberal agenda has been neoliberalized so that it goes along with that agenda. And anyone who speaks outside of that is marginalized. And so and that includes monetarily. And so what's happened in funding is corporate funded foundations fund the environmental groups, and these are corporations who are, deeply indebted for their monetary wealth to an exploitive way of doing business. And so for one, they can greenwash and conscience launder by telling themselves and the world, look how wonderful we really are, how virtuous we are in truth, because look at all the money we're giving to try to protect the planet. But their way of protecting it has to be such that they can keep doing business as usual. So you've had environmental groups grow their budgets astronomically as neoliberal capitalism has evolved over the last 40 or 40 plus years. And you've seen them evolve their visions and missions and strategies and policies to go along with this neoliberalization and this support of this only doing things that allow capitalism to continue to progress, which sounds like a good term, to evolve unimpeded or relatively unimpeded. So, I mean, that's what's happened. I think as a psychoanalyst, though, I want to add what Christopher Bolus has recently talked about in his the paper that he gave to 2,000 of us. You may well have been there. Civilization and the Discontented, and what he called psychotic group processes. So just in brief, what he means by that is catastrophic, exploitive, destructive things that occur can be negatively hallucinated. That is, I will not see this horror right in front of my eyes. And I will believe what some powerful entity is telling me is going on that gives a discourse to prove that this horror does not exist, or insofar as it might exist, it's being taken care of by this powerful entity. And so you get essentially then delusion and hallucination in large groups. And so that's what he means by psychotic group processes. And so, I mean, you can, pick on the Trump world easily, and you can easily point to how that's the case with Trump and his base, which Bolus talks about in that paper. But, you can look inside the Democratic Party world and see it also. And you can look inside environmentalism and see it also. So we're seeing that here in Yellowstone. So the major environmental groups, who are all heavily indebted to corporate foundations, have done this model, have adopted this model for quite some time now called collaborate and compromise, where they whereby they go about forming special interest groups who are touted as being representative of the community, but they are always vetted. They're always exclusive. There are always those who are excluded from these collaborations. So you can guess it's who's excluded are people who are going to bring a discourse that to be materialized would go against the grain of the neoliberalization, the economization of everything. So what's happening is environmental groups will go in and they'll work with other groups who want to use wild land for things that are destructive in one way or another to the wild land, and they'll subdivide. They'll say, okay, you get this and we get this. And so we environmental groups, we can get this piece of land designated as wilderness under the 1964 Wilderness Act, and we can say, look, we've made more wilderness, we're doing something good. And what they aren't saying is, we excluded people from the collaborations who were going to ask us to answer to questions like, when we traded away these other lands that were crucial for wildlife and got wilderness in land that is not crucial for wildlife, how do we defend our actions, right? That's going on all over the place. And in Montana, which is vital, at least in this part of Montana, for the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, and thus for Yellowstone Park, these groups are now, I would say, even becoming rather megalomaniacal. So in terms of psychotic group processes, again, they're very excited because they think they have, that they will accomplish. I'll have to give some detail of what's at danger specifically in this area of Yellowstone, but they think they're about, and they probably are about to accomplish a pretty destructive end point of their collaboration and compromising. And now they want to apply that model to other existing contested wild lands in Montana, and saying, look, we've been so successful here, we can go be this successful in these 5 other areas and do the same damage we've done here, but that we're not calling damage, that we're calling conservation.
Yeah, and your point too, what you said before, if like this central area ecosystem relies on this rest of this kind of land and ecosystem around it, then if you divvy that up and like give half of it away, then just because you keep part, the whole doesn't function anymore. So it's lost.
Beautiful. That's right. Thank you. You got it exactly. So let me try to paint a picture of what is happening right here. So in the Gallatin mountain range, which extends from right here in Livingston, Montana, 50 miles down south into Yellowstone Park, and then a ways into the park. North of the park boundary, there is, in the Gallatin Range, there is an area called, well, it's a wilderness study area, which means it's land that was set aside by legislation. It's the 1977 Montana Wilderness Study Act, passed by Congress, US Congress. And it was set aside, when you set aside land as a wilderness study area, it means that the governing agency, in this case, the Forest Service, has to, quote, manage it for as though it were designated wilderness. So to the degree that it had wilderness qualities at the passage of the act, so in 1977. So that means mountain bikes didn't exist then. So there were no mountain bikes riding in there, so you don't have mountain bikes riding in there now. It means, or that's one interpretation. You certainly don't have hordes of them, which is not open to interpretation. Motorbikes, other motorized recreational vehicles existed, but not anything like in the power and ability to move quickly and with a lightness of the rider. Like, it's these machines that are very powerful are much easier to maneuver now. You used to have to, you know, have like great physical strength to ride a snowmobile and move that big behemoth and around on the snow. And they've gotten lighter and lighter and easier to ride and faster. This happened with all the motorized vehicles. They've even made new kinds of motorized vehicles that are even more capable of getting deeper and deeper into land, wild land, quicker and quicker. So all of these things should be kept out of wilderness study areas because they're not allowed in wilderness. So now what's happened is we have this large wilderness study area in the Gallatins that could be designated wilderness, which would be very important to the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, not only for general wildlife diversity, but specifically for a major elk herd, like, I don't know the number exactly, let's say 1,000 head of elk, who winter and birth in these two lower elevation valleys of this wilderness study area. And the environmental groups who are powerful, the dominant ones, the corporate funded ones, who have done the collaborate and compromise model and now want to do it elsewhere in wilderness study areas around Montana. So they've traded away in their collaborate and compromise agreements the most important parts of the wilderness study area. The WSA is the acronym. These two lower elevation valleys that are that where these elk live in the winter, which is no small thing to survive in the winter here. It is. So what's today, October 23rd, to give you a sense of the land, what weather is here right now. When I went running, it was 8 degrees this morning. We've got several inches of snow on the ground. We're about to get 9 inches of snow this weekend, and the temperatures are going to be at 0 and below 0 for a couple of nights. That's unusual for this time of year, but it's not that unusual. This is cold country. Those elk need those lower elevation valleys. They don't have anywhere else to go.
All the animals you described, they all sound like the animals that are here in northern Sweden, the elk and moose, and we don't have grizzly bear, but they have brown bear and elk and reindeer.
That's wonderful.
And buffalo.
Oh, wow. Well, so yeah, I'll tell you the wilderness study area, the name of it here, it's the longest, most awkward name. It's Hyalite, Porcupine, so these are names of creeks, and Buffalo Horn. So buffalo. So the threat, the most iconic and visible other wildlife important feature of these two valleys that these groups want to give away removed from wilderness protections that they now have with the WSA, is the grizzly bear. So the Yellowstone grizzly, there are 700 of them. They had been reduced, I think, to under 100. I don't remember the number at their lowest. And they're up to 700, and they need to be able to get out of the Yellowstone area into the northern Rockies ecosystem, so farther north, to survive for their genetic integrity. They need to interbreed. They can't stay in just this group of 700 and survive in perpetuity. And so that these two lower elevation valleys are crucial for their ability to migrate. So again, this would be interrupted because, so what would happen is, so these drainages, so that's the name for a valley or a canyon with, as it drains the water that comes into it from snow and rain, it's called a drainage. And so these drainages, the porcupine and the buffalo horn, are both lower elevation, which is, you know, unusual to have lower elevation valleys that are, so they're full of meadows, right? And they're not just rocky and snowy and inclement, and there's something more lush about them. And so that's why they're richer in wildlife. So they're not called rock and ice wilderness, quote unquote. That's the higher, like, less desired stuff. So that's what they're going to get. That's what they're trading and going to say, oh, look, we got rock and ice wilderness. They won't call it that, but that's what they want to get. And they're going to get, and they're going to say, we got this big victory, but they're giving away this vital country. So it's, I'm finally linking, there's just so much to say. I'm linking back to a point you made. So yeah, it's right. The porcupine drainage, it comes out of, into the Gallatin River. The Porcupine Creek drains into the Gallatin River. So at the terminus of that valley, the Porcupine Valley, is right across the river from Big Sky, Montana. So Big Sky is this enormous alpine retreat city. It's a retreat town. It's like Vail or Aspen or Telluride, Colorado. And it's just, it's full of ultra wealthy people. It's a neoliberal bastion, just like those places I've named in Colorado are. And those places in Colorado have lost their wildness. They're tragic. And that's what's happening here. So the porcupine drains really just a stone's throw from Big Sky. So what you have is, you can have people now, if that becomes not wilderness protected, then you're going to have mountain bikers who are going to come from all over the Western United States and farther away, because mountain biking is a big recreational activity here. It's amazing to think of this. It still boggles my mind, but it's like you go out to places where they're allowed and they're everywhere. These mountain bikes are everywhere. It's like in the backcountry. It's crazy. And so wildlife can't live with this, right? We're acidifying the backcountry is what we're doing. And so if you make this a recreation area, which is what looks like is about to happen, then you're going to have people come hang out in very pleasant to stay in, if you've got the money to do it, Big Sky, Montana, and ride your mountain bike right outside your snazzy hotel room door, right all the way to the trailhead and up into the Porcupine. You can ride over the top of the ridge because it's got lower elevation ridge to cross over into the Buffalo Horn Creek drainage, which is another lower elevation valley, which will also be traded away. And so it's nightmarish to imagine what that will do. So there, that kind of brings it to the end of trying to explain.
What do you think people can do to help?
Oh gosh, so I'm glad you asked. I think I would say for people to try to spread the word, to try to become informed, to try to understand what is happening here. to look at, so there is a group, the Gallatin Yellowstone Wilderness Alliance, that I'm affiliated with, that opposes these big green groups. It has no corporate monies. It has no allegiance to corporate America or global corporatism. It has no full-time staff. It has virtually no part-time staff, very little money, right? It's volunteers, but it is fighting a fight. Look at that website for information, Gallatin Yellowstone Wilderness.org. That is a great place to get information about what's happening. Think about just joining that group, which is free to do. If you can donate to that group, that would be great. But even just to join so that numbers grow. So we can say we have this many members from around the country who support what we're saying. But we're going to be trying to find a congressional champion to sponsor a wilderness bill that doesn't give away the farm. And so have that in the back of your minds too. Speak to your congressman, if you care about this issue, your congressman who you know might be sympathetic to what's going on here. Inform them if you've become informed. Those are things people can do. Those are very real things people can do that actually might be amongst the most important actions. Because, I mean, that's what's going to have to happen in the short run is wilderness legislation in the Gallatins to protect not rock and ice wilderness, but full wilderness protection. There's 230,000 acres at stake that should be legislated wilderness. At minimum, 175,000 of that are more actively contested and could more readily probably be designated. Ideally, the full 230 should be. The big greens are looking at only going for 100 and giving away the most wildlife crucial. So that's in a nutshell. Again, that's the difference.
Yeah, and I mean, at this point, I think we should be looking at making more land protected and not be giving away anymore, because we can't we can't afford to do that. And people,
that's
like,
right.
if people want to build or whatever, they need to like fix up things we've already ruined or exploited, you know, and use that, but don't keep taking more and more land.
Yes, thank you. That is part of our message. It's part of my message is no more subdividing, no more building roads into wild country, no more logging old growth forest, no more building new logging roads to log more trees in the forests. That's not what we need to do. We've done enough.
Exactly. Enough's enough.
You know, too, Vanessa, to accomplish that, I mean, I think we've got to look at this larger ethic for humanity. We can't keep growing the human population indefinitely. We can't keep solving our economic problems by creating more and more money that buys more and more and gobbles up more and more and destroys more and more. And that continues to not look at what we're doing to ever larger percentages, not just numbers, but percentages of humanity, rendering them more and more dehumanized, and further and further despoiling the whole damn planet. And so it's like that whole global picture has got to be looked at. That ethic of terra and demos has got to be a guiding principle. And I think people have to start thinking that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's scary how the government hasn't protected, because like I'm from Florida originally, I'm from Miami. And so my whole life growing up there, I kept seeing like, Miami naturally has these huge banyan trees with all these roots and foliage and shade, which we need in Miami because it's really hot. And like they just continually like widen the roads and rip out these really old trees and then plant all these little palm trees, which don't do anything to help. And like when I was
Right.
growing up, I remember riding my bike around and like there were orange trees and tangerines and kumquats and kiwis and star fruit and all sorts of different kinds of fruit trees. We had mangoes and avocados, and you could ride your bike around and just like pick fruit off the trees. And this is like in the 80s, But now it's not, you can't do that anywhere. It's all gone. And even I am from Coconut Grove originally, and there's this like the oldest house in southern Florida is this place called the Barnacle. And the family who lived there, they owned all this land of like mangroves all up and down that area, and it was all protected. And when like the last one of that family died, they donated it to the state as protected land so that it would stay that way. And then the state sold it, and now they've built like all these townhouses there. And it's like, can you imagine donating your land to the state and then they sell it? Like I didn't know they were allowed to do that. That's the whole point of donating it to the state.
Right. They didn't do it through the legal mechanisms that would have prevented that. That's horrible. Or the state perverted, those mechanisms, which is always practicable.
Probably, because Florida's usually pretty corrupt,
Mm.
government-wise.
God. Yeah, we're on a really bad path. And it's like you can see why so many people negatively hallucinate. It's terrifying if you don't. And it's so much cause for grief if you don't negatively hallucinate. And if you don't believe there's some simplistic, oversimplistic savior out there who in his or in its group expressions of grandiosity are going to save you, if you don't believe that, it's pretty rough to look at.
But everyone needs to wake up. You just said it was really hard for people to, look at reality basically. And it's makes sense that everyone's kind of negatively hallucinating, which is true. I think about that all the time with this, and also with just thinking about being on Earth in general and like what is going on here. Like I sometimes think like, why aren't we always just looking at the cosmos and being like, what is this? What, like looking at nature and looking at the cosmos and being completely awestruck all the time. But of course it's probably because it's pretty overwhelming. Like, what is this?
Right. Yeah, no kidding. Yes.
So we could be awestruck or petrified all the time.
Right. I know. Well, that's really beautiful. Yeah. How do we deal with, which only some of your listenership will know the meaning of, and I don't know that I want us to try to go into, but how do we deal with the jouissance of the other that's there encroaching upon us? But I do want to go into just jouissance as a more overarching term in its relation to, and what it means in its relation to what you are just saying about why we might want to negatively hallucinate, and how this death drive kind of elaboration of Lacan's of jouissance, this notion of, I can have unending enjoyment rather than have to accept limits on enjoyment, and actually have an informed life that is appreciative of the integrity and the actuality and the otherness of everything and everyone around me. No, I don't have to deal with that. I can just consume consume whatever it is I'm consuming. It's like that jouissance is what's going on in the Northern Rockies and in the West with extractive industry and with recreation and its destructions of wild land. It's just, I can maniacally consume. I can ride my mountain bike. I can put on my snazzy, sexy looking outdoor gear and go outside and run 1,000,000 miles in the backcountry. And just, I can be a fun hog and not think that that's what I am. I can think that I just am living in harmony with nature, but all the while I'm not looking at, there are more and more of me doing this, and we're on machines and developing our bodies such that we're going farther and farther in greater and greater numbers, and we're displacing wildlife, and we're generating non-wild land by our progressive, blind, I must enjoy all the time encroachments. Jouissance in the Rockies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that really makes sense, and that's a really good point. And something else that happened during this pandemic that I don't know if you saw, and I can't remember what it was called, but I will link to it. But Michael Moore had posted this film on YouTube for free over the summer that was talking about, I didn't know how I felt about it because it was so depressing, but now I feel like, oh, okay, I see what he's talking about, because it sounds like what you're talking about, where like the whole industry of like being green, this like green industry is actually really corporatized as well. And these alternative energy sources, even if we switch over to them, we don't know what kind of effect they're all going to have. Like it takes a lot to mine whatever they need for these batteries, for the electric cars and things like that. So it's just like a whole other set of problems.
That's it. Very good. Yeah, the movie is Planet of the Humans. Yeah, yep, yeah. And so as a matter of fact, part of the rest of that story is big green groups wanted to suppress that story. They didn't want that documentary out there, especially big green groups that are promoting the Green New Deal and the trillions of dollars that that investors and financiers can make from the Green New Deal, just promoting it as quote green without, like you say, looking at what kind of price of destruction are we paying in this transition by going to these other forms of power generation. What harm are we doing there? And what are we, both to the land and in terms of environmental injustice, like what other countries who have less political power than we, and what more poverty-ridden parts of those countries will be devastated by our extractive and polluting industries there that are going to support our new quote greenness, right? All of that is negatively hallucinated too. But so the Green New Deal folks and like 350.org and Bill McKibben and Naomi Klein, who are all big promoters of this, they went very actively in this effort to get rid of, as much as they could, censor from dissemination and from public reception, this movie, The Planet of the Humans. Very disturbing. It's like,
yeah,
nope,
because
let's
I
not.
saw a lot of backlash on that on the internet after it came out too. They said, oh, we hope Michael Moore hasn't done more harm now that he's put this out, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, nope. It's yeah, that's, and you know what, you hear that from the big green groups here in Montana. Like they'll want to attack a group like mine by saying, you know, you're spreading these ideas to the general public that are going to make us look bad, and we won't be able to do the good things we're doing. And it's like, but this isn't a good thing you're doing.
Yeah, you can't compromise with big corporate interests.
Yeah.
It's like negotiating with terrorists.
Right. Right. Oh, goodness. Well,
Is there anything else
this
you wanted
was,
to be sure to mention?
um, I don't know. I was thinking this seems like a pretty good wrapping up place. I suppose I just would like to underscore that there is this vast ecosystem here called the Greater Yellowstone that the country's and the world's first national park, Yellowstone, is dependent upon, um, and that is still not spoiled. It's a very rare place that we have the wildness that we have here. It is sublime, and it is just awe-inspiring. I mean, I have goosebumps right now speaking. Just I'm in it, and we're very close to destroying it with really a perverted language. I mean, pretending that we're doing something good while we're really just continuing to cannibalize. What remains here right now is truly a treasure, and it's a vast treasure, but it is really threatened. It's all around it, right, just nipping at the heels of this whole 20 million acre ecosystem or incredible incursions of humanity. So the world needs to know, and it's being managed, quote unquote. Decisions are being made about what to do with it by people who live around it, who are special interest groups, and who are deciding it for themselves. And the world and the country are not having a voice, not to mention neither is the health of the land or wildlife. But humans who value this are not having a voice in these decisions at all. And if you care about this place, and if you have some understanding of the last best placeness of it in the lower 48, um, it's it's on the edge of not being here anymore.
Yeah, so we'll put a link to your group, and so that if anything, people can join the group and increase the numbers and therefore help increase your voice.
All right. Thanks, Vanessa. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Joseph. Keep up all the good work.
Thanks. You too. Thanks for your work with rendering unconscious and keeping the idea of the unconscious in the world.
Thank you for listening to Rendering Unconscious. You've just heard a discussion with Dr. Joseph Scalia III. For more, please visit the Gallatin Yellowstone Wilderness Alliance website at gallatonyellowstonewilderness.org. Links to everything can be found in the text accompanying this episode. If you enjoy Rendering Unconscious podcast, please visit Apple Podcasts and give us a rating to help us reach more people. Rendering Unconscious is also a book. Rendering Unconscious, Psychoanalytic Perspectives, Politics, and Poetry. From TRAPART Books, 2019. For more, please visit our publisher's website, trapart.net. That's TRAPART.net. You can support the podcast by visiting our Patreon, patreon.com/VANESSA23CARL. Your support is greatly appreciated. For more information, you can also visit my website, drvanessasinclair.net, or the podcast main website, renderingunconscious.org. Links to everything can be found in the text accompanying this episode. Audiences will stare at the mouth of us, understand what someone's this incredibly big secret and background consistent, but she knows me very well. Everyone can tell. The body of flesh or body of body, as opposed to on the same subject. Scapegoats are used banknotes alone, not the sext. Credible that, she says, that's want to be exposed. Polymorphously perverse, likely a course as any, described perversion in this way. Messages, take them or leave them. That's art. Psychoanalyst, artist, and conscious mind. And the calendar, it's not like that for a French-speaking film. Cinema that can go anywhere, and you get, I wasn't that suspicious. So, one caution must be kept in mind by women. Important to emphasize that Pompadour likes love, reinvents itself, and so on. So my big kind of self-identified, stable, substantial, reinventing should be opposed. I think the problem, I think that this is a certain logic welcoming you into you that have known one lover's hand, thing we can do, one, their actual embodiments. The dream releases the shade, the underworld, sensations, chiefly from those, and his footnote, the ego is.
Ridiculous digression, winding path, detour, have become a fortress of beauty and laughter, success and pride, and love.
I dare you.
It all along.
I know you.
One has been decided.
There's a, or
Favor.
if a man came. Fear of restrooms, ways to reconcile. Because for me, the little animals, Aronofsky himself, and he be at my very elbow. Alchemy, work. Use it is so strong, must destroy in order to be contained within the limits of self-preservation. Shakespeare portrayed this. His impetuous lovers cannot be satisfied by the activation of a small amount of libido that is indispensable to. The tarot is a cut-up. Sigils are cut-ups. My mind is settling down. Sky across the pretty head into the street. 2, and all I get is trouble and strife. I'd really like a Swiss Army knife and claws. To move on, how do we make it work even better? One was, phew, we can do it. I guess it did work. But the question becomes if we were going. That's a question we'd want to ask. This mother? Because if not, I have. Thank you very much. Bye. Okay, last thing. Have lived for art. Photographers. I couldn't want to nourish growth. Pornography too. I know that. I have known. I love you very